Good morning, my students. That's me, د.هاني الحسني, and that's the course of novel. Today we will continue the second novel explanations, and we still in novel elements. And especially today, the whole lesson will be about Plot in Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. So we still in the same novel, and this novel has a lot of actions, but we need to minimize all the explanations within few lines in case we could give you in a simple way how to analyze the novel based on the plot elements. As you know, in the plot we have 5 important major elements which are the first, which is the exposition, and that means the initial actions that look like at the beginning of the novel. The second, rising actions, and in that part you could recognize remarkably the elements of conflict and how the conflict already raised up until it reached the third part of the plot, which called climax. And the climax you could recognize how the issue or the case of conflict already clear, and you could finalize what is your thought from the beginning to what will be your thought after mid of the novel. And in that you can see the peak in the conflict or the climax. After the climax you could follow quite dramatically and rapidly the falling actions, and in the falling actions we have to understand the actions that may be in line with our thought, or unfortunately everything will be upside down and it goes against our will. Then the last element, which is resolution, it's the end of the novel and how the novel ended happily or based on our anticipations, or on the other hand it's just a huge unfortunate and the worst ending that looked like tragedy. And that's how you need to understand our mutual friend regarding to it. At the beginning, the first slide, we have summary of a plot. So you know the summary, we already read it many times, but we have to repeat it in another way in case nobody recognized what we thought or what we thought and talked before. Today we have to remind you this is the plot without the elements, and in the same time it looked like a summary, overall summary for the whole novel. The novel that included 4 books, and you can recognize it from the series and the TV. Also, you know, like it's the latest and the recent and last work that Dickens did. And in that regard, it looked like very huge fictional work, which is impressive to many people around the world. And here, the story, it's a central point around John Harmon. John Harmon, son of a wealthy dust contractor, and here to his father's fortunate if he agrees to marry Bella. So that's what we repeated many times about marrying Bella is a key for receiving the wealth or the money that he left after his death. And in that regard, when his father already died, or the death of his father is happening when he was out of England. He was in Africa for the empire of England, how he left everything because he wanted to move to another empire, but he back again because, you know, after the 18th century or mid of 18th century and industrial revolution, everybody look for money and look for being a wealthy person and rich man. That's why when he recognized that his father already did, he left Africa in the ship and moved to reach England. And in that way, on the way, he is supposed drowned. They throw him in the river in case he will be died. And luckily, he was alive and alive by being, or they throw somebody else, and they false his identity. The falsification happened because no one can recognize him. They just recognize someone like wearing like his clothes. And with his suppose of death, the thus fortunate reversed to Nicodemus Buffin, or Mr. Buffin. So the fortune or the money or the will that he had, the old man left back to Buffin, his father's former servant. So he is working with the old father of Haman. Buffin and his wife bring Bella to live with them in hopes of alleviating her disappointment at not receiving the fortune. So they knew that his son will not back to marry her. In the same time, they are trying to convince her she could live with them until something changed. And in that regard, the avaricious Bella is indeed determined to marry money. I mean, she looked for money as well. And everyone is greedy here. They are looking for the huge amount of money. They are looking for that will and fortune. That's why suddenly John Rooksmith appeared as a secretary to Mr. Buffin, and he is a mysterious young man. Nobody realized him exactly, and at the same time, it's eponymous of mutual friend. And who comes to work as Buffin's personal assistant? John Harmon wins Bella love, and that's the real dramatic action that really stand against everyone's wish, except John Harmon, which he is John Rooksmith, and she already fell in love with Harmon and married him later on. He later also reveals his true identity and regains his fortune. So that's how the way for the plot already manipulated by Dickens. In the same time, we need to read a lot until we recognize that ending. And meanwhile, while Jafar Hexam has a falling out with his old partner, Rogue Rider Hood, Lizzie gets her bright but selfish young brother into a school where his teacher, Bradley Headstone, develops an unhealthy love for Lizzie. And you know, like Headstone, the teacher Headstone loves Lizzie. In the same time, she is also following at the end Eugene Rayburn, despite the obvious difference in their social class. And that's how also another irony, how the rejection of the social classes already there, and the challenges to reject the social classes look like Lizzie and Bella in the same time. While in the story you can recognize some moral development of Bella and growing love between her and John Harmon. The second line of a plot, it's about degenerates into obsession, murder, and attempted murder. And that's a story that happened in the ship, how they tried to kill him, and that's what we call a complex plot. They are, in this story, Dickens made two plot. The first one in the ship, how we are really attracted to that conflict until we reach the climax that he didn't die when they throw him, but it was another one. And at the same time, at the end of the story, we recognize how Bella became closer to be with him, even he is a secretary man, before she realized he is the real John Harmon. And you know, beyond the two basic plots, the book is completely overstuffed. Like, it has a lot of things regarding to ridiculous coincidences. So you know the coincidences, it means two actions happen at the same time, or it means a kind of action that happened without any recognition, but later on it influences and has impact on the characters. And you know, it's impossible happening with characters who are little more than caricatures. Means maybe the malevolent or the subplots that peter out and go nowhere. It means we could trace the actions and finally we find nothing. That's how the other subplots happen, but we mention it's only about two major plots, and the major one, which is at the final, how he married Bella after he announced his real character or his real personality. So let's move to the first part of the plot, which is the exposition or initial action. We have here initial situation. All of London is abuzz after a wealthy here named John Harmon died. Like the man that, you know, the plot is centralized around him. When John Harmon died, the inheritance money goes to servants named Mr. and Mrs. Buffin. So that's the first part. When John Harmon announced as a dead man, so London changed in that regard, and the inheritance leaves woman named Bella Wilfer in cold. Means she didn't get any benefit from the promise of father of John Harmon, and because of that, John Harmon, you know, at the end of the day, the fortune came back to him. But Mr. and Mrs. Buffin feel bad about Bella's poor luck, so they take her on as their adopted daughter. So Mr. and Mrs. Buffin, they felt very sad about Bella's condition, as she is a poor girl. She lived in poverty for a longer time, and as they are lucky as servants, they decided to adopt Bella in their house. In that regard, also, Eugene Rayburn develops a crush on a pretty girl named Lizzie Hixam. So Lizzie, we say she sent her brother to a teacher which called Bradley Hidston, but in the same time he looked for her, and at the end she married him. Even the differences, even though the differences between social classes already there. The only problem is that Lizzie has another male admirer who hates Eugene. So when you have two men looking for one woman or one girl, a lot of troubles will happen. So Lizzie at the end decided to marry Rayburn. That's how the exposition, and that's we could find in book number 1 a lot of actions and chapters moved on until we recognize the exposition. Second point we have here a rising action, which includes a conflict and complications, how the actions already moved one by one until we find out the reality. And here, once the Buffin received all money and the house, everything in cash, so a man named John Rooksmith applies to be Mr. Buffin's secretary, and that's how the coincidence or how the luck already made in that rising action, and he got it. But over the time, Buffin becomes paranoid about his money, and suspicious of everyone around him, even the good people. So Mr. Buffin all the time looked like around himself as he had kind of thinking what he was and what he is already. In the past he was a servant and now he's a master man. So you know, like it's a huge leap, like it's a long leap and jumping from one place to another within a limited time. And that's what happened to Buffin. He said, I need to hire a man to teach me, as he is ignorant man. You know, Mr. Buffin just ignorant. He didn't read, or he's not educated. He hired a man called Silas Wigg to read for him in the every evening. But Wigg is secretly planning to blackmail Buffin for the lion's share of his fortune. So he's trying to play around until like he found a way to ask Buffin for such money. And Eugene here continues his courting of Lizzie to trace her until he convinces her. But his romantic rival Brad Heston is stalking him and planning to murder him. That's what happened to Eugene Rayburn. And in that way, to handle rejection smoothly, Heston. So Heston tried to forget what happened to him as he lost Lizzie. For sure, it's like a very huge loss, as he lost the woman or the girl that he looked after. Later on, we have a climax, which includes the turning point. So when we talk about climax, it's about the turning point. When we read about turning point, you can find out that Mr. Buffin greediness and paranoia become so strong when he fires his secretary, Mr. Rook Smith. So he kicked out Rook Smith from his staff for nothing. He has no reason to kick him out. But Bella Wilfer is aghast at Buffin's action that she decides to walk away from him and his money. She decided to move on with Mr. Rooksmith and wants to marry him. And that's how we couldn't understand what's going on, how the girl followed the man without any condition. So there is no strength or strength attached, or no strings attached to that part. And yeah, you can continue here. Mr. Rooksmith is actually the same person as John Harmon, but he didn't announce or reveal his real character. And in the meantime, Eugene Rayburn gets attacked and nearly murdered by his rival Hiddleston. He attacked him, but Lizzie finds him left for dead in a river and saves him. So she saves Eugene Rayburn, and the experience bring them closer together, and they get married. You know, like it's not as he expected. You know, Bradley Hiddleston expected that he will kill Eugene Rayburn and he will marry Lizzie, but unfortunately what he prepared for didn't happen or didn't occur. And later we have falling action. There is pretty much a blizzard of falling action in this novel. Why? Because it has a lot of dramatic action that moved one by one, and we couldn't really trace all of them. I here mention the major of them. John Harmon and Bella gets married, and we learn that Mr. and Mrs. Buffin knew John Harmon was alive all along. So, you know, Mr. Buffin was just acting acting mean and greedy to see if Bella would stand up to him. But, you know, she just ignored him. In the meantime, Bradley Hiddleston, who tried to kill Eugene, gets into a tussle with Mr. Riderhood, a guy who knows about the attempted murder and is trying to blackmail him. So the life is back up and back to him as karma. You know, karma when you did something, and in the future it will back to you the same as you did. and both men fall into a river and drown. You know, at the end of the day, Brad Hiddleston died, and also Mr. Riderhood already died. So both of them, because they twisting and playing very deceitful or deceptible games that made people into a lot of troubles, they already drowned in the river, they died. Meanwhile, Silas Wigg steps forward to blackmail Mr. Buffin for his money, but Buffin informs him that the money is John Harmon's now, and Wigg gets himself thrown into a garbage cart for his trouble. So he has nothing, he didn't get anything from Buffin at the end of long working with a servant. You know, Silas Wigg also, his game is already failed. He got a failure for tracing and following Mr. Buffin for nothing. And the end of the whole plot issue, when we talk about resolution, which also called denouement, you know what happened at the end. It's about marriage between John Harmon and you know, the Bella, but we need to remember that the case of Eugene marriage to Lizzie Hexam, also we can find a dinner party between Eugene marriage to Lizzie Hexam, and how people criticize them based on their morality or for their bad behavior. But they married. However, one shy man named Mr. Timlow finds the courage to speak up and say that if two people love each other, that's all that matters. The other people at the party try to shout or to shut him down, but it's too late. Love has spoken, even if the other high society types do not want to accept it. So the last in the resolution, it talked about the two characters who married each other, and they are from different social classes. You know that the Eugene and Lizzie Hexam, it's a really big trouble for many people at that time, how they accept their marriage. And at the same time, that's what happened. The Mr. Timlow already asked all people to close or to shut up. That's how no one stopped them from breaking that marriage, and everyone is happy at the end of the day. We can finalize that resolution. Is really very nice, and it's worthy to be read. And also how the challenges against social class and defying is really made it up, and it's what we can wrap it up here. It's successful story between the lovers, how they just accept the love, and the matter, all the matter is love. And the lovers, they stay with each other safe, no problems, and nothing to fight against. And that's what we need to let you recognize for the plot. Usually, if we have any kind of a question, the question could be write about the plot, or write an essay about the plot in our mutual friend. What you need to remember is remembering the resolution is like this, is the situation that happened regarding to marriage of Mr. or Rayburn, Eugene, and Lizzie Hexam marriage, and how they receive a lot of criticism in their party or marriage party. You want to remember also in Falling Action, what happened. It's the game that played by Silas Wigg is already also got a failures, because the blackmailing didn't happen as John Harmon received the money. Also, the marriage of Harmon and Bella already happened as expected, and his fortune back to him. And Bradley Hiddleston and Mr. Riderhood they died because of their bad intention in the river as well. For the climax, we have to remember that Rocksmith got fired, but what happened here? Bella Wilfer followed him. She has, what we can recognize, she had followed him without any condition. In the same time, what we need to understand that Eugene and Hiddleston, they are in a competition to win Lizzie. Also in backing to Rising Action, the conflict, we need to remember the conflict between Mr. Buffin and how he got wealth. In the same time, he's suspicious to everyone around him. Also, Silas Wigg blackmailing him. Eugene Rayburn wants Lizzie. Even he knew that Hiddleston or Brad Hiddleston is following her. The exposition starting, as we mentioned, with death of a father of John Harmon, and he already announced to be John Harmon announced to be dead, and how his fortune, or the father of John Harmon's fortune, moved to Mr. and Mrs. Buffin. That's our lesson today. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish to meet you soon for a discussion.